Imagine holding in your hands a single stone, green as a still forest pool, etched with words so ancient that civilizations rose and fell before anyone fully understood their meaning. That is the Emerald Tablet. Not a book, not a scroll, a single condensed whisper from a mind that seemed to exist outside of time itself. The Emerald Tablet is one of the most mysterious and influential texts ever attributed to human history. Though the earliest known Arabic versions surfaced around the 6th to 8th centuries, scholars and mystics alike have long believed its origins reach far deeper, possibly into the heart of ancient Egypt, or perhaps even further back, into a world we have largely forgotten. What makes this tablet so extraordinary is not just its age, it is its compression. Everything it says in a breath. There are no long explanations, no elaborate stories, just principles, timeless, crystalline principles about how the universe is structured, how energy moves, how the above and the below mirror each other like a lake reflecting the sky. The most famous line, "as above, so below," is so elegantly simple that we almost miss its depth. Think about it this way. When you drop a pebble into still water, the ripple does not just move outward, it reflects back. The universe, the tablet suggests, works the same way. What exists in the vast cosmos also exists within you. Your heartbeat echoes the rhythm of stars. For centuries, alchemists, philosophers, and scientists, including Isaac Newton himself, studied this tablet in search of deeper truths. And here is the beautiful irony. The more science advances, the more it seems to confirm what the tablet quietly suggested all along. The universe is not chaos. It is a conversation. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a sunlit shore, watching the horizon shimmer where the sky meets the ocean. Now imagine that somewhere beneath those calm rolling waves lies an entire civilization. Entire streets, temples, libraries, lives, all resting silently under fathoms of dark water. That is the vision Plato gave us when he wrote about Atlantis around 360 beats in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He described it not as a myth, but as a historical account passed down through Egyptian priests to the Athenian statesman Solon, and then, eventually, to him. A powerful island empire, advanced and prosperous, that disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean in a single catastrophic day and night. For centuries, scholars debated whether Atlantis was literal or metaphorical. But here is what is quietly compelling. Ancient flood narratives appear on virtually every continent. The Sumerians had their Great Flood. The Hindus describe the sinking of Dwarka. Indigenous peoples across the Americas speak of lands lost beneath rising waters, separate cultures, separated by vast oceans, and yet they all remembered the same kind of loss. Modern geology tells us that at the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically as glaciers melted. Entire coastal regions were swallowed. Entire communities vanished. This is not speculation. It is scientific record. So when Plato wrote about a civilization that vanished beneath the sea, perhaps he was not inventing. Perhaps he was remembering. The human mind has a peculiar relationship with collective memory, passing stories forward like a flame passed between candles, each one carrying the same light, even if the wax is different. Atlantis Rising is not just about a lost island. It is about the possibility that we are all walking on the stories of those who came before us. Have you ever visited a place for the very first time, a street, a building, a landscape, and felt with quiet certainty that you had been there before? Not déjà vu exactly, something deeper, something that felt less like confusion and more like recognition. This experience has been reported across cultures for thousands of years, and it has given rise to one of philosophy's most enduring questions. Does the soul carry memory beyond a single lifetime? The ancient Egyptians believed deeply in what they called the Ka and the Ba, aspects of the soul that survived physical death and retained the imprint of lived experience. The idea was not fringe or unusual in their world. It was foundational. It shaped their architecture, their rituals, their understanding of time itself. Plato, drawing from Egyptian and Pythagorean traditions, introduced the concept of anamnesis, which in Greek means unforgetting. He believed that learning was not the acquisition of new information, but the recovery of knowledge the soul already possessed from previous existences. When you understand something deeply, you are not learning it, you are remembering it. Modern science has not confirmed reincarnation, but it has produced genuinely puzzling data. Researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia spent decades documenting cases of children who recalled detailed, verifiable information about previous lives, including names, locations, and circumstances of deaths they could not possibly have known through ordinary means. These cases number in the thousands. Here is the thought worth sitting with. If memory is not only biological, if it lives in something deeper than the brain, then who you are today is not the beginning of your story. It may be the latest chapter in something far, far longer, and every moment of unexpected recognition might just be your soul quietly turning a familiar page. Close your eyes for just a moment and picture the largest library you have ever imagined. Not rows of books, but something more like light itself, organized, layered, infinite. Every thought ever thought, every word ever spoken, every life ever lived, recorded not on paper, but in the very fabric of existence. This is the concept of the Akashic records. The word Akasha comes from Sanskrit, meaning sky, space, or ether, the invisible medium through which all things move and are preserved. Ancient Vedic traditions spoke of a cosmic field in which every action, every intention, every experience was permanently and perfectly encoded. What is remarkable is that this idea did not stay within Eastern philosophy. It travelled. Helena Blavatsky in the 19th century brought it to Western esotericism. Rudolf Steiner described the Akashic field as a kind of supersensible realm accessible through deep spiritual development. And more recently, physicist Ervin Laszlo proposed what he called the Akashic field in scientific terms, suggesting that the universe itself maintains a kind of memory through quantum vacuum fluctuations. Now here is where the science becomes quietly extraordinary. Quantum physics has already established that particles can remain correlated across vast distances through what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Information, it appears, does not simply disappear. It transforms, entangles, and persists. Think of it like this. When you leave footprints in fresh snow, you are gone, but the impression remains. The Akashic records suggest that every moment you have ever lived has left its own kind of footprint, not in snow, but in something far more permanent. The ancient seers did not have particle accelerators, but perhaps they had something else, a quality of inner stillness so refined that the universe simply spoke to them directly, and what they heard, they tried to describe with the only word vast enough: everything. Suppose you found yourself standing in a moonlit temple in ancient Egypt, and in the shadows before you stood a figure unlike any other, tall, composed, with the head of an ibis and eyes that seemed to hold the entire night sky within them. This is Thoth, and he is about to share something with you. Thoth was among the most revered of all Egyptian deities. He was the god of writing, wisdom, science, magic, and the judgment of souls. But beyond mythology, the figure of Thoth points to something historians find genuinely fascinating. Ancient texts suggest that Thoth may have been based on a real being, perhaps a great teacher or sage who existed in a time so distant it eventually became myth. The Egyptians credited Thoth with giving humanity the gift of writing, mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. They called him the scribe of the gods, the one who recorded the divine laws governing the universe. In Hermetic tradition, he becomes Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest Hermes, the master of three realms, earth, sky, and the afterlife. The 42 books of Thoth, described in ancient sources as containing the complete knowledge of the universe, were said to be housed in a sacred library beneath the sands of Egypt. Whether literal or symbolic, this tradition inspired Renaissance thinkers, alchemists, and scholars for centuries. Here is the secret hidden within the secret. Thoth did not hoard knowledge, he encoded it. Every symbol, every hieroglyph, every ritual in the Egyptian tradition was a container for a teaching, not to hide truth, but to protect it, ensuring that only those who genuinely sought it would find it. The deepest secrets, it seems, have never truly been locked away. They have simply been waiting for the right quality of attention. What if you were placed in a small aircraft, flying low over the Amazonian canopy, and your instruments suddenly revealed perfectly geometric formations beneath the green roof of trees below? Squares, circles, long straight lines extending for kilometers, structures that no known ancient civilization was supposed to have built. This scenario is no longer imaginary. In recent decades, LiDAR technology, which uses laser pulses to map terrain beneath vegetation, has uncovered thousands of previously unknown ancient structures across the globe. In the Amazon, in Cambodia, beneath the sands of Egypt, and under the forests of Central America, hidden cities and pyramidal structures have emerged from the earth as if the land itself is slowly deciding to remember. Egypt alone may hold far more than its visible monuments suggest. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have indicated anomalies beneath the Giza Plateau and in surrounding regions, structures and cavities that have not yet been fully excavated or explained. Some researchers suggest there may be entire complexes still waiting beneath the sand. Pyramidal forms themselves appear on every inhabited continent. Egypt, Mexico, Cambodia, Sudan, China, Peru, Bosnia. This global consistency is not coincidental, and it is not fully explained. Different civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, all arrived at the same elegant form, the four-sided pyramid aligning Earth with sky. Consider what that means. Either there was a remarkable, undocumented connection between ancient peoples, or the pyramid shape itself contains some principle so fundamental that human minds, independently and across centuries, kept arriving at the same conclusion. Think of it like this. When water finds its level, it does so everywhere simultaneously, not because puddles communicate, but because they all obey the same law. Perhaps ancient builders were not copying each other. Perhaps they were all listening to the same truth. Envision what it would be like if you were walking through a dense jungle and suddenly the trees opened up to reveal an entire city. Stone towers draped in moss, avenues stretching between fallen archways, and the silence of centuries hanging over everything like a held breath. This is not fantasy. This is what explorers felt when they encountered Angkor in Cambodia, or Tikal in Guatemala, or the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa. Human history is littered with forgotten kingdoms, civilizations that rose to extraordinary complexity, and then, for reasons we are still piecing together, declined, dispersed, or simply vanished from the narrative. The Minoans of ancient Crete built a sophisticated palace civilization with plumbing, multi-story architecture, and a script we still cannot fully read, only to collapse around 1150 BC. The Indus Valley civilization, encompassing parts of modern-day Pakistan and India, developed planned cities with advanced water systems as far back as 2500 BC, and then quietly faded from history without any clear evidence of violent conquest. What is haunting about these forgotten kingdoms is not their disappearance, it is how much they knew. The Indus Valley people had standardized weights and measures. The Minoans had drainage systems. The builders of Bekli Tepe in Turkey constructed elaborately carved megalithic temples over 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture was believed to have been established. These civilizations challenge the simple story of human progress as a straight upward line. Perhaps history is more like a river than a road, sometimes wide and rushing, sometimes narrowing and going underground, only to emerge again somewhere unexpected. Every forgotten kingdom is a reminder that brilliance does not require our recognition to have existed, and that the earth holds more stories than it has yet agreed to tell. Consider what it would be like if you were an ancient astronomer, lying on cool stone beneath a desert sky so clear and unpolluted that the Milky Way looked less like a distant suggestion and more like a river of fire directly above you. You would see what your ancestors saw and what they spent their lives mapping, measuring, and, according to some traditions, attempting to reach. The idea of stargates, of portals connecting distant points in space or different dimensions of reality, is often dismissed as modern science fiction, but the concept appears with striking consistency across ancient traditions. In Sumerian texts, the gods travelled between realms through what were described as shining doorways. Egyptian ritual texts speak of specific astronomical alignments that opened passages between the world of the living and the divine realm. The Hindu concept of tirtha, meaning sacred crossing place, describes specific locations where the boundary between worlds becomes thin enough to traverse. Modern physics, interestingly, does not dismiss this idea. The mathematics of general relativity permits the existence of wormholes, theoretical passages through space-time that could connect vastly separated points. Einstein himself and physicist Nathan Rosen described these structures, now called Einstein-Rosen bridges, as far back as 1935. The alignment of ancient monuments with specific star systems, Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, appears again and again across cultures. The Egyptians aligned the Giza pyramids with Orion's belt. The Anasazi people of the American Southwest built structures that aligned precisely with solstices and equinoxes. Stonehenge frames the rising midsummer sun like a doorway. Were these simply calendars? Perhaps. Or perhaps the ancients understood something about the relationship between matter, consciousness, and cosmic position that we are only beginning, in our own language, to rediscover. Take a slow breath and look at your own hand. Now spread your fingers gently and notice the proportions between each segment of each finger. Or think about the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the branching of a river delta seen from above. All of these forms, from the microscopic to the planetary, follow the same elegant mathematical ratios. This is sacred geometry, the study of the patterns and proportions that appear to be hardwired into the structure of the universe itself. Ancient cultures from Egypt to Greece to India to Mesoamerica understood these patterns not as mere aesthetic choices, but as fundamental truths about how creation organizes itself. They built temples using specific proportions. They designed ritual objects and cosmological diagrams using specific shapes. The circle, the triangle, the pentagon, the spiral were not decorations. They were instructions written in the language of form. The flower of life, a geometric pattern of overlapping circles found carved in ancient temples across Egypt, India, China, and the Middle East, was considered a blueprint of creation itself. From this single pattern, virtually every other geometric form can be derived, including the Platonic solids, which the Greeks believed corresponded to the fundamental elements of reality. Modern physics has found that crystalline structures at the atomic level mirror these same geometric forms with mathematical precision. The carbon atom, the building block of all organic life, forms in the shape of a tetrahedron. Snowflakes always express hexagonal symmetry. These are not coincidences, they are the universe being consistent with itself. Here is the quiet wonder in this. If the same geometry that appears in a seashell also appears in a galaxy, then perhaps the universe is not as random as it sometimes feels. Perhaps it is a single, endlessly patient artist returning again and again to the same beloved shapes. Picture yourself walking through a vast underground corridor, torchlight flickering across walls lined not with stone, but with something that feels more alive: clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, carved columns dense with inscription, records upon records of knowledge so old it predates every civilization we currently teach in schools. Now imagine a door at the end of that corridor that has been sealed for thousands of years. The idea of hidden or destroyed libraries is not myth. It is documented history. The Great Library of Alexandria, one of the ancient world's most celebrated centres of knowledge, was partially or wholly destroyed, though historians still debate when and by whom. Countless texts were lost with it, texts on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and history that may never be recovered. In the Vatican's secret archives, which are actually called the Vatican Apostolic Archives, there are over 85 kilometres of shelving containing documents dating back over 12 centuries, the vast majority of which have never been publicly examined. The term secret, it should be noted, refers to the archives being private rather than hidden, but the sheer volume of unexamined material is genuinely extraordinary. The Mayan codices, elaborate books of history, astronomy, and ritual were almost entirely destroyed by Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa in 1562. He burned thousands of manuscripts he considered heretical, and by his own account, the Maya wept as they watched their entire recorded world turn to ash. Here is what this pattern quietly suggests. Knowledge has always been recognized as power, and power, in human hands, has often feared what it did not control. But here is the counterpoint. Every attempt to erase knowledge has ultimately failed. Ideas, like water, find their way through. The fragments that survived have inspired entire movements of rediscovery. Forbidden archives do not destroy truth. They delay it. Imagine being in a moment before electricity, before engines, before the hum of modern civilization. You are sitting beside a fire in an open courtyard somewhere in the ancient world, and an elder is speaking. Not reading from a page, speaking from memory. And every word carries the weight of generations. Ancient wisdom traditions were not primitive attempts at science. They were sophisticated, often profoundly accurate systems of understanding developed through thousands of years of careful observation and lived experience. Their methods were different from ours, more poetic, more symbolic, more deeply connected to nature's rhythms, but their insights were real. Consider Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine, which dates back over 3,000 years. It identified the importance of gut health, of circadian rhythms, of the relationship between mental states and physical illness, ideas that modern medicine is only now formally validating. The Hippocratic tradition in ancient Greece similarly recognized that environment, diet, and emotional state were fundamental to health, not just symptoms to be suppressed. Ancient navigators of Polynesia crossed the Pacific Ocean in open canoes, guided not by instruments but by stars, ocean swells, bird behaviors, and cloud formations. Their navigational knowledge was so precise that they colonized islands spread across millions of square kilometers of open sea. Modern oceanographers have described their methods as a form of cognitive GPS developed over centuries of intimate environmental relationship. What these traditions share is not mysticism for its own sake, but a deep, patient attentiveness. They listened to the world in ways that produced genuinely useful, lasting knowledge. The wisdom of the ancients is not a relic. It is a reminder that intelligence takes many forms, and that some of the most durable truths were discovered not with machines, but with stillness. Suppose for a moment that your awareness is not something your brain produces, the way a candle produces light, but rather something your brain receives, the way a radio receives a signal. What if consciousness is not local, not contained within the boundaries of your skull, but is instead a fundamental property of the universe itself, as vast and pervasive as gravity or light? This is the idea at the heart of cosmic consciousness, one of the oldest and most persistent intuitions in human thought. Ancient Egyptian theology described the nita, divine principles embedded in the fabric of reality itself, conscious qualities woven into existence rather than imposed upon it from outside. Hindu philosophy speaks of Brahman, the universal consciousness from which all individual awareness arises like waves from an ocean. The Hermetic tradition describes the universe as a living mind, thinking itself into existence through an eternal process of self-reflection. Modern consciousness research has begun to take these ideas seriously in ways that would have seemed radical just decades ago. Physicist David Bohm proposed the concept of the implicate order, the idea that beneath the visible, explicate universe lies a deeper, undivided wholeness, a kind of cosmic intelligence from which all local events unfold. Neurobiologist Christoph Koch and philosopher David Chalmers have both, in different ways, explored the possibility that consciousness may be a fundamental feature of reality rather than a byproduct of biological complexity. Here is where it becomes personally meaningful. If consciousness is not confined to your brain, then the sense you sometimes feel of being connected to something vast, of moments of clarity that seem to come from somewhere beyond your ordinary thinking, might not be imagination. It might be perception. The universe may not just be something you are in. It may be something you are of. What if you were walking along a coastline that geologists told you was once dry land, a broad, fertile plain with rivers and forests and communities of people who built lives there for thousands of years before the sea slowly, then suddenly reclaimed it? You would be walking over a civilization so completely erased by water that its very existence had become legend. This is not hypothetical. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose by approximately 120 meters. That is not a gentle change. That is the submersion of continental shelves, of coastlines, of every low-lying settlement that humanity may have built during the tens of thousands of years before recorded history begins. Researchers Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, among others, have argued that this catastrophic sea level rise may have erased entire civilizations, leaving only the most inland or elevated survivors to carry fragmented memories forward as myth. These are not fringe arguments. They are increasingly being engaged by mainstream archaeologists and geologists who acknowledge that our picture of prehistoric humanity is genuinely incomplete. Underwater archaeology has already confirmed the existence of submerged structures in places like the Gulf of Kambat in India, the coasts of Japan at Yonaguni, and the Western Mediterranean. Some of these structures appear to be artificial, though debates about their origins continue. What we call the beginning of civilization, the Neolithic period, agriculture, the first cities, may in fact be a rebuilding, a reconstruction by the survivors of something that came before. Think of it this way. When a great forest burns, the first plants to emerge from the ash are not new species. They are seeds from the old forest, buried deep enough to survive. Perhaps human civilization works the same way. Visualize being in a pristine workshop before any building has begun. The walls are bare, the floor is clean, and on the table before you lies a single, beautifully detailed drawing. Every proportion calculated, every angle considered, every relationship between parts reflecting a deeper principle of harmony. This is what ancient architects believed they were working from when they designed their greatest monuments, a divine blueprint, a perfect template written into the nature of reality itself. The concept of a divine blueprint, a cosmic plan underlying all of creation, appears in traditions spanning every continent. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Seshat was described as the divine architect, laying out temple foundations according to celestial measurements. The concept of Ma'at usually translated as truth or justice, was equally a principle of cosmic order, the deep structure that kept stars in their courses and kept the Nile returning each year to nourish the land. In the Hermetic tradition, this blueprint is described as the divine mind's first thought, the ideal pattern from which all manifestation flows. In Platonic philosophy, these are the forms, perfect archetypal structures of which all physical things are imperfect but recognizable reflections. Modern physics, remarkably, echoes this intuition. The fundamental constants of nature, the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the charge of an electron, are so precisely calibrated that the slightest variation in any of them would make life, and perhaps matter itself, impossible. Physicists call this fine-tuning, and it has prompted serious scientific debate about whether the universe's laws reflect something more than chance. Whether you call it a divine blueprint, a fundamental law, or fine-tuned constants, the universe appears to have been structured with extraordinary precision. The deepest question is not whether a blueprint exists. The deepest question is, who drew it? Imagine you are standing on a beach watching the ocean. The waves are endlessly varied. Some are tall and crashing, some are gentle and slow, some arrive as long, quiet swells that move through the water without breaking. And yet beneath all that variety, beneath every single wave, regardless of its shape or size or speed, there is one ocean, one continuous body of water expressing itself in infinite forms. Ancient wisdom traditions proposed something remarkably similar about the nature of reality itself. What appears to us as a world of separate things, separate people, separate events, separate substances, is in truth a single, unified field of existence expressing itself through countless forms. In Hermetic philosophy, this principle is expressed as the idea that all is one. In Vedic tradition, it is Brahman, the undivided ground of all being. In Taoism, it is the Tao, the formless source from which all forms arise and to which all forms return. Modern physics arrived at its own version of this ancient intuition through a very different path. Einstein spent the last decades of his life searching for a unified field theory, one mathematical framework that could describe all the fundamental forces of nature within a single structure. He did not complete it, but the search continues in the form of string theory, quantum gravity, and M theory, all of which propose that the apparent diversity of physical forces and particles emerges from a single underlying reality. Quantum entanglement, perhaps the most experimentally confirmed and philosophically disorienting phenomenon in modern science, demonstrates that particles that have interacted remain correlated across any distance instantaneously. They behave as if separation is an illusion. And perhaps it is. Perhaps what the ancients intuited through meditation and the moderns are discovering through mathematics is the same quiet, astounding truth. Beneath the waves, there is always only ocean. Think about the last time something struck you as undeniably beautiful. A landscape, a face, a building, a piece of music. Now consider this. There may be a precise mathematical relationship underlying that feeling of beauty, a proportion so fundamental to nature that it appears in the spiral of a galaxy and in the curve of a seashell, in the branching of a tree and in the architecture of the Parthenon. This is the golden ratio. Expressed mathematically as approximately 1.618 and represented by the Greek letter phi, it describes a proportion in which the relationship of the larger part to the smaller part equals the relationship of the whole to the larger part. It sounds abstract until you start seeing it everywhere. The ancient Greeks knew it as the divine proportion. Renaissance artists, including Leonardo da Vinci, incorporated it deliberately into paintings and architectural designs. The proportions of the Great Pyramid at Giza, when calculated carefully, reflect the golden ratio with remarkable precision. The Fibonacci sequence, that beautiful chain of numbers in which each number is the sum of the two before it, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13 and so on, generates the golden ratio as it extends toward infinity. And nature uses this sequence obsessively. The number of petals on most flowers, the arrangement of seeds in a pine cone, the spiral of a hurricane seen from space, the double helix of Dina. All of them express Fibonacci patterns and, by extension, the golden ratio. Here is the quietly profound implication. Beauty may not be entirely subjective. Some part of our sense of beauty may be a recognition, a deep biological and perhaps even cosmic resonance with a pattern that runs through all of creation. When you find something beautiful, you may be experiencing the universe recognizing itself. Cast your imagination back to a night with no electric light anywhere on Earth. You are lying on warm ground in the open desert, and the sky above you is so impossibly dense with stars that you can almost feel the weight of them. For the ancient peoples of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica, this was every night. And they did not merely admire it, they studied it with the dedication of scientists and the reverence of devotees. Ancient celestial maps were among the earliest and most sophisticated achievements of human intelligence. The Babylonians tracked the movements of planets with such precision that their astronomical tables can still be used today to calculate celestial events accurately. The ancient Egyptians aligned their temples and monuments with specific stars and star systems, embedding astronomical information into architecture so that the buildings themselves functioned as observatories and calendars. The Dendera zodiac, a stone carving from an Egyptian temple ceiling dating to around 50 BC, depicts a star map so detailed that it has been used to calculate the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of the Earth's axis that takes approximately 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. The ancient Egyptians apparently knew about this cycle. They called it the Great Year. Indigenous peoples around the world developed celestial navigation systems, agricultural calendars, and ceremonial cycles based on stellar observation with precision that continues to impress modern astronomers. The Dogon people of Mali demonstrated knowledge of the star Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star invisible to the naked eye, long before Western telescopes confirmed its existence. The sky was the first text humanity ever read, and the ancients, patient and attentive, read it fluently. The stars were not distant, they were guidance. Let yourself drift into a particular vision. You are above the Giza Plateau at night, floating high enough to see the entire complex beneath you, the three great pyramids arranged in their specific, slightly offset alignment, and above them in the sky, perfectly mirroring their arrangement, the three bright stars of Orion's belt: Mintaka, Alnilam, Alnitak. Stone below, stars above. As above, so below. This is the Orion correlation theory proposed by researcher Robert Bauval in 1983. He noticed that the three pyramids of Giza are not arranged in a straight line, but in the same offset pattern as the three stars of Orion's belt, and that the Milky Way, in the orientation it held around 10,500 BC, mirrors the position of the Nile River in relation to the pyramids. Egyptologists have debated this theory vigorously, but the correspondence remains striking, and it does not stand alone. The ancient Egyptians had a profound mythological relationship with Orion. They called it Sa, the constellation of Osiris, god of resurrection and the afterlife. The pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings in human history, contain passages describing the soul of the pharaoh ascending toward Orion after death. Across the Atlantic, the ancient Hopi people of the American Southwest arranged their three main villages in the same offset pattern as Orion's belt and described Orion as central to their cosmological worldview. Two civilizations, separated by an ocean, both oriented their sacred geography toward the same constellation. Here is the thought that sits quietly at the center of this. When ancient peoples looked up at Orion, they were not just mapping the sky. They were mapping their understanding of where humans come from, where they go, and what connects the dust of the earth to the fire of the stars. Envision what it would be like if you were seated in a candlelit study in Alexandria during the 2nd century, surrounded by texts from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and India, all of them converging in your hands. You are a scholar of the Hermetic tradition, and the name that appears across all of these traditions, the name that threads everything together, is Hermes Trismegistus. Thrice greatest Hermes, Hermes Trismegistus is one of the most fascinating and elusive figures in the history of ideas. He is simultaneously a Greek deity, an Egyptian sage, and a legendary author of a vast body of philosophical, magical, and scientific texts known as the Hermetica. Scholars today generally believe these texts were written between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE in Alexandria, but the traditions they encode are far older, drawing from Egyptian, Greek, and Babylonian sources that reach back thousands of years. The core teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus describe a universe animated by divine mind, a reality structured by correspondence and resonance, and a human being capable of ascending, through knowledge and inner transformation, toward the divine source of all things. During the European Renaissance, the rediscovery of Hermetic texts, translated by Marsilio Ficino under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici in 1463, sparked an intellectual revolution. Scholars like Pico della Mirandola and Giordano Bruno took Hermetic ideas seriously as keys to understanding both the cosmos and human potential. Hermes Trismegistus was not a god to be worshipped, but a teacher to be understood. And his essential teaching was this: the universe is not indifferent to you. It is structured by the same intelligence that looks out through your eyes. The seeker and the sought are, in the deepest sense, the same. Imagine yourself in a medieval alchemist's laboratory. The room is warm with the glow of furnaces, lined with glass vessels and curious instruments. But here is the thing that history got wrong for centuries. The greatest alchemists were not primarily trying to turn lead into gold. They were using that process as a map for something else entirely. They were trying to transform themselves. Inner alchemy is the tradition of using the language and imagery of physical transformation, of heating, dissolving, purifying, combining, and crystallizing, as a symbolic framework for the transformation of the self, from the crude, reactive, unconscious patterns of the ego towards something more refined, more luminous, more free. This tradition runs through Hermetic philosophy, Taoist internal alchemy, Tantric yoga, Sufi mysticism, and certain strands of Jewish Kabbalah. Different cultures, different languages, the same essential map. In the Hermetic tradition, the 3 stages of alchemical work, the nigredo, or blackening, the albedo, or whitening, and the rubedo, or reddening, correspond to stages of inner transformation. First comes the confrontation with shadow, the difficult, honest encounter with what is unexamined and unresolved within us. Then comes purification, a clarifying of intention and perception. And finally comes integration, when the separated parts are reunited into something whole and radiant. Carl Jung studied alchemy deeply and concluded that the alchemists were, often without fully realizing it, describing the psychological process of individuation, the lifelong work of becoming fully and authentically oneself. The gold the ancient alchemists sought was never merely a metal. It was a state of being, a quality of consciousness that does not tarnish, does not corrode, and does not diminish with time. And the furnace in which it is refined is not made of stone. It is made of courage, honesty, and the willingness to keep going. The laboratory, it turns out, has always been within you. Let yourself settle into a quiet moment and consider something most of us never pause to notice. Every single day, without any conscious effort on your part, your body is performing alchemy. Food becomes energy, sunlight becomes vitamin D. Grief over time becomes wisdom. You are already a living crucible, constantly transforming one thing into another. This is the essence of timeless alchemy, not a medieval curiosity, not a failed precursor to chemistry, but a universal principle describing how transformation works at every level of existence, from the atomic to the cosmic to the deeply personal. The roots of alchemical thought stretch back to ancient Egypt, where the word Kemet, meaning black earth, referred both to the fertile soil of the Nile Delta and to the foundational art of transformation. From Kemet came the Arabic alchemia, and eventually the word alchemy. The Egyptians understood that the black soil of the Nile, enriched by annual flooding, transformed dead land into extraordinary abundance. Transformation was not supernatural to them. It was the most natural thing in the world. Islamic scholars of the 8th through 13th centuries, particularly Jabir and Hayyan, preserved and extended alchemical knowledge with rigorous experimentation, laying genuine groundwork for modern chemistry. What made their work remarkable was the dual nature of their inquiry. They investigated the physical world while simultaneously asking what the physical world was trying to teach about the spiritual one. Here is the timeless truth embedded in alchemy's long history. Nothing in the universe stays in the form it arrives in. Stars burn and become new elements. Caterpillars dissolve entirely within their chrysalis before becoming something winged. Even grief, pressed long enough by the weight of time, becomes something that can carry others. Transformation is not an interruption of life. It is the rhythm life runs on. Picture yourself high above the earth, looking down not at the physical surface, but at something invisible to ordinary sight, a vast, luminous network of lines and nodes. A geometric web wrapping the entire planet in a pattern of breathtaking symmetry, like a living mandala, like the inside of a crystal grown to the size of a world. This is the concept of the Earth's crystalline grid, sometimes called the planetary grid or the crystal grid, a theoretical energetic structure underlying the physical geography of the Earth and connecting its most sacred and geologically significant sites. The idea was formally proposed in 1970 by three Russian scientists, Nikolai Goncharov, Vyacheslav Moroz, and Valery Makarov, who mapped what they described as a geometric structure of 12 pentagonal faces and 20 triangular faces overlaid on the planet. What they found extraordinary was that the vertices and intersections of this structure corresponded with remarkable frequency to the locations of ancient monuments, centres of civilization, and zones of unusual geological and biological activity. Giza, Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, Angkor Wat. These sites are not randomly distributed across the Earth's surface. When mapped carefully, they cluster along geometric alignments that have been calculated and recalculated by independent researchers with consistent results. Geologists have long known that the Earth has its own electromagnetic field generated by the movement of molten iron in its core. This field is not uniform. It has nodes of higher and lower intensity. Some researchers propose that ancient cultures, with their acute sensitivity to natural energies, built their most important structures at these points of concentrated earthly force. Whether the crystalline grid is physical, energetic, or symbolic, the pattern it reveals is undeniable. The Earth, like all things in nature, appears to organize itself according to geometry, and perhaps our ancestors could feel exactly where those lines ran. Close your eyes for just a moment and think about the last time a piece of music made your chest feel full, or brought unexpected tears to your eyes without any particular reason. You were not just responding to melody or rhythm, you were responding to resonance. Your body, which is itself a vibrational system, was recognizing something in that sound and responding as if to a kind of homecoming. Harmonic resonance is the phenomenon by which one vibrating system causes another to vibrate at the same or related frequency. Strike a tuning fork and hold it near a second tuning fork of the same pitch, and the second will begin to hum without being touched. This is not magic. It is physics, and the ancients understood it profoundly. The Pythagoreans of ancient Greece built an entire philosophical and mathematical system around the principle of harmonic resonance. Pythagoras, who travelled extensively in Egypt and Babylon, taught that the universe was fundamentally musical, that the movements of celestial bodies produced harmonics he called the music of the spheres, and that the same mathematical ratios governing musical harmony also governed the proportion of the cosmos. Ancient temples were designed with acoustic properties that modern researchers have only recently begun to measure. The chambers of Newgrange in Ireland and the Hypodrome of Malta produce standing waves at specific low frequencies when sound is introduced. Researchers from the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory found that these resonant frequencies correspond to those produced by the human voice in ceremonial chant, and that they appear to affect brainwave states measurably. Here is the deeply personal implication of harmonic resonance. You are not separate from the vibrational field of the universe. You are a frequency within it. And when something in your life feels genuinely right, deeply aligned, perhaps what you are feeling is the universe, for a moment, tuning you. Imagine you are wandering through an ancient temple at the edge of a jungle, running your fingers along carved stone walls, and everywhere, on every surface, the same image appears. A serpent, coiled, rising, stretching between earth and sky. You have seen this symbol before, in Egypt, in India, in Mesoamerica, in Greece. Everywhere human civilization has taken root, the serpent has been there, holding something it refuses to let go. The serpent is arguably the most universal and most complex symbol in human history. In virtually every ancient tradition, it carries the same essential qualities: transformation, wisdom, hidden knowledge, and the regenerative power of life itself. The reason is both symbolic and biological. The snake sheds its skin and emerges renewed. To ancient peoples, this was not merely interesting. It was a living demonstration of the principle of death and rebirth, of the continuous renewal that underlies all of existence. In ancient Egypt, the uraeus, the rearing cobra on the pharaoh's crown, represented divine authority and the protective power of awakened consciousness. The Kundalini tradition of India describes a coiled serpent energy at the base of the spine that, when awakened through spiritual practice, rises through the body's energy centers to produce enlightenment. In the Mesoamerican tradition, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, embodied the fusion of earth and sky, matter and spirit. The caduceus, two serpents entwined around a central staff attributed to Hermes, became the symbol of medicine and healing. Today it remains on hospitals and medical insignia worldwide, without most people knowing how ancient its origins truly are. Here is what all these traditions agree on. The serpent does not represent evil. It represents the transformative power that dwells at the root of life. The wisdom that comes not from avoiding the depths, but from descending into them and returning, changed. Step back into any ancient culture you can imagine, and you will find the same quiet obsession. Numbers. Not just as tools for counting grain or tracking time. Numbers as living entities, as windows into the structure of reality, as the secret language in which the universe wrote itself. The study of numbers as carriers of meaning beyond their mathematical function is known as numerology, but calling it simply numerology undersells its depth. The ancient Pythagoreans considered numbers to be the fundamental substance of all reality. Not metaphors for reality itself, expressed in quantitative relationships. Aristotle documented that Pythagoreans believed the principles of numbers were the principles of all things. The number 3 appears with extraordinary consistency across ancient cosmologies. 3 worlds: underworld, earth and sky. 3 aspects of time: past, present and future. 3 stages of existence: birth, life and death. In Egypt, many deities existed in triads. In the Hermetic tradition, the principle of 3 is encoded in the title Trismegistus itself, meaning thrice greatest. The number 7 appears in the 7 classical planets of ancient astronomy. the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. 7 notes in a musical scale. 7 colours in visible light. 7 energy centres in the human body according to Hindu tradition. The pervasiveness of 7 across independent systems is genuinely difficult to explain through coincidence alone. The number 42 held deep significance in ancient Egypt. The deceased in the Hall of Ma'at faced 42 divine judges. The books of Thoth were said to number 42, and the diameter of the earth in miles, expressed in ancient units, reflects this same numerical relationship when calculated using specific ancient measurement systems. Numbers, the ancients believed, were not invented by humanity. They were discovered. And the deeper you look, the more the universe seems to agree. Envision a morning when you are hiking across open countryside and you notice something unexpected. The old church on the hill, the ancient standing stone in the next valley, the ruined tower on the far ridge, and the sacred well by the stream below are all arranged in a perfectly straight line stretching across the landscape for kilometres without any visible path connecting them. You would stop. You would wonder. You would ask how. This is precisely what amateur archaeologist Alfred Watkins experienced in 1921 while riding across the Herefordshire countryside in England. Looking at a map, he noticed that ancient sites, churches, standing stones, earthworks, hill forts and sacred wells aligned in long straight lines crossing the landscape. He called them ley lines, from the Old English word ley, meaning a cleared or open land. Watkins believed these were ancient trackways, practical straight line routes connecting significant locations across the pre-Roman British landscape. Later researchers expanded the concept dramatically, proposing that ley lines were not simply paths but channels of earth energy, currents of natural electromagnetic or geomantic force flowing along the Earth's surface, and that ancient peoples built their sacred sites precisely where these currents intersected or ran most strongly. The alignment of ancient sites along straight lines has been documented not only in Britain but across Europe, in the Americas, in China, where the concept of dragon paths called Lung Mei in Feng Shui describes very similar principles, and in Aboriginal Australia, where songlines are literally paths of sacred geography connecting significant sites across the continent in patterns that are simultaneously geographical, mythological, and musical. Modern geomagnetic surveys have confirmed that the Earth's magnetic field does vary in intensity and direction across the landscape in ways that are not random. What the ancients felt beneath their feet may have been real. They simply had a different, older word for it. Think about the last time you watched a flock of birds move across the sky together, turning as one fluid body, shifting direction without any visible signal passing between them. Or consider a salmon, born in a mountain stream, travelling thousands of kilometres across the open ocean, only to return to the exact same stream years later, without a map, without instruments, guided by something invisible and completely reliable. That invisible guide is the Earth's magnetic field, and the ancient world, it appears, was far more aware of it than we have typically given it credit for. The Earth's magnetic field is generated by the movement of liquid iron in the planet's outer core, producing a protective magnetosphere that extends thousands of kilometres into space. Without it, solar wind would strip away the atmosphere, and all life as we know it would cease. It is not an exaggeration to say that the magnetic field is one of the primary reasons life exists on this planet at all. Ancient Chinese texts document the use of magnetic compasses as far back as 2,000 years ago, initially not for navigation, but for geomantic practice, for orienting buildings and burial sites in alignment with the Earth's energetic flows. The discipline of Feng Shui is, at its foundation, a sophisticated system for harmonizing human environments with the Earth's natural magnetic and energetic patterns. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has confirmed that the human body contains magnetite crystals in the brain, the same mineral used by migratory birds for magnetic navigation. We may have a biological capacity for sensing the Earth's magnetic field that modern life has simply allowed to go quiet. Here is what is quietly profound about this. You are not separate from the planet's magnetic embrace. You were born inside it, shaped by it. Every cell in your body has lived its entire existence within the Earth's invisible, protective, orienting field. Picture yourself deep inside a natural cave where the walls are lined with enormous quartz crystals, some taller than a person, catching the light of your torch and scattering it into 1,000 prismatic fragments. You would feel it immediately, not just visually, but atmospherically. A quality of stillness, of vibration almost too subtle to name, as if the rock itself is quietly humming at a frequency just below hearing. Crystals have been used in healing, ritual and technology by cultures across the entire span of human history. Lapis lazuli was prized in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt for its protective and healing properties. Jade in China and Mesoamerica was considered a stone of vitality and immortality. Amethyst in ancient Greece was believed to prevent intoxication, and its name comes from the Greek word meaning not drunk. From a material science perspective, crystals are remarkable structures. A crystal is defined by its perfectly ordered, repeating atomic lattice, a geometric precision at the molecular level that gives crystals their symmetry, their optical properties, and their physical stability. Quartz crystals in particular have the property of piezoelectricity, meaning they generate an electric charge when mechanically compressed, and conversely they vibrate at a precise, stable frequency when an electric current is applied. This is why quartz crystals are used in every modern watch and clock to keep time with extraordinary accuracy. Whether crystal healing works in the way its practitioners describe remains a matter of ongoing debate in the scientific community. What is not debatable is that crystals are not inert. They are physically active, energetically responsive materials whose properties science has found genuinely useful. Perhaps the ancients, sensing something real in crystals, even without the language of piezoelectricity, were not wrong to treat them with reverence. They simply had a different vocabulary for what they already knew. Suppose you were walking past an old cathedral and the bells began to ring. Not just the sound of them, but the physical sensation, the way the sound moves through your chest, through your bones, through your entire body, as if the vibration has decided you are part of the instrument. That is not imagination. That is physics. And it is something the ancient world understood with great deliberateness. Sound is not simply something you hear. It is something you are immersed in. Sound is the movement of physical matter, the compression and rarefaction of air molecules, and because your body is physical matter, sound moves through you as completely as it moves through anything else in its path. Ancient cultures use sound as medicine, as architecture, as a cosmological tool. The ancient Egyptians used specific vocal tones in temple ritual, and many of the proportions of their temples appear designed to amplify and sustain specific resonant frequencies. Sanskrit, the sacred language of ancient India, was understood not as a symbolic system, but as a vibrational one, in which the specific sounds of words carried the same inherent power as their meanings. The Vedic concept of Nada Brahma translates as the universe is sound or sound is God. This was not poetic license, it was a cosmological statement. The universe at its foundation, before matter, before form, is vibration. Modern physics offers a striking parallel. String theory, currently one of the most seriously considered frameworks in theoretical physics, proposes that the fundamental constituents of reality are not particles but one-dimensional vibrating strings, and that all the varied properties of matter and energy arise from the different vibrational modes of these strings. The universe may literally be music all the way down, and the ancients, in their temples, their chants, and their sacred instruments, were already playing along. Let your mind drift toward that curious threshold state between waking and sleep, that soft, luminous space where thoughts become images, where the boundaries of ordinary logic gently dissolve, and where sometimes, without any effort at all, an understanding arrives that daylight hours never quite deliver. Ancient cultures across the world recognized this threshold not as an absence of consciousness, but as an alternate form of it, one that accessed dimensions of reality inaccessible to the waking mind. The Aboriginal Australians of the continent's oldest living continuous culture, stretching back at least 65,000 years, have a cosmological framework known as the dream time. It is often misunderstood as referring to dreams in the ordinary sense. It refers, more precisely, to the eternal creative dimension from which all of reality flows, a timeless realm in which ancestors, animals, landscapes and stars exist in their most essential form, and from which the physical world is continually sustained. The dream time is not past. In Aboriginal understanding, it is always present, accessible through ceremony, story, song, and a quality of awareness that the culture has spent tens of thousands of years refining and transmitting. Ancient Egyptian dream temples, known as serapeum or incubation temples, were places where priests and petitioners would sleep within sacred precincts in order to receive healing visions or divine guidance. The Greek tradition of temple sleep, called enkoimesis, served a similar function. Healing, prophecy, and wisdom were expected to arrive through the dreaming mind. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that the brain during REM sleep and in hypnagogic states shows patterns of activity associated with heightened creativity, novel connection making, and the integration of disparate memories into coherent understanding. Perhaps the dreaming mind is not escaping reality. Perhaps it is finally getting close enough to touch its deeper layers. Think for a moment about the feeling of cold, clear water cupped in your hands after a long walk on a warm day. That first sip. The way it moves through you, not just quenching thirst, but restoring something harder to name, something that feels like return. Water has held a sacred place in human experience for as long as humans have existed, and not merely for practical reasons. Every major ancient civilization arose beside water, yes, but every major ancient civilization also regarded water as something more than a resource. They regarded it as a living presence, a carrier of memory, a medium between worlds. The ancient Egyptians personified the primordial waters of creation as Nun, the formless infinite ocean from which Ra, the sun, rose on the first morning of the world. In Hindu tradition, rivers, particularly the Ganges, are considered divine beings. The ancient Celts considered springs, wells, and rivers to be gateways to the other world, and deposited votive offerings in sacred waters across Europe for thousands of years. These offerings have been recovered by archaeologists in enormous quantities, from the Thames in Britain to the lakes of Scandinavia. The water of sacred wells and springs was believed to carry healing properties specific to each location. Modern geochemistry has confirmed that different springs do indeed carry different mineral compositions, some of which have measurable therapeutic effects. Dr. Masaru Emoto, a Japanese researcher whose work remains controversial but fascinating, proposed that water could structurally record and respond to human intention and emotion, producing different crystalline forms depending on what it was exposed to. Whether his methods were sufficiently rigorous, the intuition behind them is ancient. Water remembers, water carries, water connects, and every civilization that has ever loved the world has poured something of itself into the nearest stream. Visualize a flame burning in a stone temple, tended carefully, never allowed to go out, not for days or months, but for generations. Priests trained since childhood whose only purpose is to ensure that this particular fire, lit from a particular source, under particular sacred circumstances, continues to burn. This is not a metaphor from an ancient story. This is documented historical practice in temples across the ancient world. The eternal flame was one of the most widespread and persistent sacred practices in human civilization. The Vestal Virgins of ancient Rome maintained a perpetual flame in the Temple of Vesta at the heart of the city for over 1,000 years. It was believed that Rome's safety depended on it never going out. In ancient Persia, Zoroastrian fire temples maintained sacred flames for centuries, some still burning today. In ancient Greece, a sacred flame burned at Delphi and was the source from which other fires across the Greek world were ritually kindled. Fire in ancient cosmology represented not just warmth and light, but the animating principle of life itself. The Vedic fire god Agni was not merely a deity of the physical flame. He was the divine force that animated consciousness, the light of awareness burning at the center of all living things. In the Hermetic tradition, fire was the most refined of elements, closest in nature to the divine mind. The preservation of fire across generations also carried a deeply practical dimension. Before reliable methods of fire starting existed, the ability to maintain a continuous flame from a known, trusted source was genuinely vital. Sacred fires were insurance for survival dressed in the language of the divine. Here is the quiet truth at the center of this. The human need to keep a light burning in the darkness is not merely religious or practical. It is something older than both. It is the refusal to let what matters most disappear. Cast your thoughts for a moment towards someone you know or someone you have known whose presence felt different from the ordinary. Not necessarily someone famous, maybe just a person whose calm ran deeper than the circumstances around them, who seemed to look at the world with a quality of attention that made everything around them feel more real, more vivid, more meaningful. You were not imagining it. You were detecting something. The awakened mind is not a metaphor. It is a measurable state of human consciousness that has been described across traditions for thousands of years and is now being studied with increasing rigor by neuroscientists and psychologists. In Buddhist tradition, the concept of Bodhi, from which the word Buddha derives, literally means awakening. Not the acquisition of information, but a qualitative shift in the nature of awareness itself. In the Hermetic tradition, the goal of philosophical practice was the awakening of the nous, the divine intellect, understood as the highest faculty of human consciousness, capable of directly perceiving the underlying order of reality. The Egyptian concept of the Ak, often translated as the glorified spirit, described a state achievable in this life through specific practices of purification, ritual, and inner discipline, in which the individual consciousness became luminous, integrated, and transparent to divine intelligence. Modern neuroscience has identified distinct brainwave states associated with deep meditation, including gamma wave activity, which appears during states of intense focus and perceptual clarity, and has been recorded in long-term meditators at levels significantly higher than in non-meditating. Control groups. What the ancients called awakening, modern science is beginning to map, and here is what both traditions agree on. The awakened mind is not something added to human consciousness from outside. It is what consciousness actually is when the noise settles and the deeper signal comes through. Let yourself stand in imagination at the edge of a great turning wheel, not a small wheel, the largest wheel imaginable, one so vast that a single revolution takes longer than any human life to complete, longer perhaps than any civilization has ever lasted. You cannot see it turning, but you can read the evidence of its movement everywhere you look. Ancient cultures across the world shared a vision of time not as a straight line moving from past to future, but as a vast circular process of recurring cycles, each one echoing the last at a larger scale. The Hindu tradition describes 4 cosmic ages called yugas: the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, moving from an age of truth and golden harmony through progressive stages of declining consciousness before renewing again at the start of a new cycle. The full cycle, called a Mahayuga, spans 4,320,000 years, and the Mahayugas themselves are nested within larger cycles called kalpas, each one a single day in the life of Brahma, the creator. The ancient Greeks had a similar concept called the Great Year, connected to the precession of the equinoxes, that 25,920-year wobble of the Earth's axis that causes the apparent position of the stars to shift slowly across the sky. Many researchers believe that this astronomical cycle underlies the mythological ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron found in Greek, Roman, and Norse traditions. Modern cosmology describes its own cycles: stellar life cycles, galactic rotation, the possible oscillation of the universe itself between expansion and contraction. The deepest implication is this: nothing in nature has ever moved in a straight line. Everything turns. Everything returns. And what feels like an ending, seen from a wide enough perspective, may simply be the wheel completing its turn. Imagine you are standing in the final moment before dawn, in that deep blue stillness when the world holds its breath, and then the first light appears on the horizon. Not the full sun yet, just the first tentative luminosity. The world does not merely become visible in that light, it seems to become more itself, more real, as if light is not simply allowing you to see the world, but is somehow constituting it. Ancient traditions across the world held a remarkable conviction that light was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a living principle. The first word spoken by the divine in the book of Genesis is not matter, not form, not even consciousness in the usual sense. It is light. Let there be light. Before anything else, before the stars, before the sun, light as the foundational act of creation. In ancient Egypt, the sun god Ra was not simply the deity governing a celestial body. Ra was the animating principle of consciousness itself, the living light that made awareness possible. The daily journey of Ra across the sky and through the underworld at night was a cosmic narrative about the perpetual renewal of light, of life, of consciousness. Modern physics describes light in ways that echo this ancient reverence. Light in the form of photons is the only thing in the known universe that experiences no passage of time. From the photon's own perspective, it is emitted and absorbed simultaneously. It exists entirely outside of time, and it travels at the one constant that all of physics is built around. Biophotons, tiny emissions of light produced by living cells, have been documented and measured. Every living organism, including you, emits a faint but real luminescence. Biologically, literally, you are a source of light. The ancients called the divine spark within each person a fragment of living light. Thousands of years later, physics has found the light, still burning, still real, still at the center of everything that lives.